Hollywood has seen its fair share of cautionary tales, but none as raw, brutal, and breathtakingly scandalous as the story of Barbara Payton. She wasn't just a fallen star. She was a woman who took the silver screen, chewed it up, and spit it out, leaving behind a trail of broken hearts, shattered careers, and tabloid headlines soaked in whiskey and regret. She was, at her peak, the kind of woman who made men ruin themselves just to be near her. And at her lowest, the kind who would trade her body for a hamburger and a place to sleep. Some called her the most horrible woman in Hollywood. But maybe the real horror was what Hollywood did to her. Before the arrests, the scandals, the beatings, and the sex work, Barbara Payton was just a girl with movie star dreams and a dangerous hunger for more. Barbara was born November 16, 1927, in the tiny town of Cloquet, Minnesota. Her father, Erwin Lee Redfield, was a rugged, hot-tempered construction worker. Her mother, Mabel, was strict, cold, and deeply religious. Together, they made a home built more on fear than affection. Barbara's childhood was defined by two things: turbulence and beauty. Even as a young girl, strangers would stop her mother in the street to comment on how striking she was. Blonde curls, icy blue eyes, porcelain skin, Barbara looked like a cherub carved by a drunk god. Her parents took pride in her appearance, but little interest in her inner world. Behind closed doors, it wasn't a happy home. Barbara later described her childhood as emotionally barren. Her father alternated between violent rages and cold silences, while her mother pushed strict moral codes Barbara couldn't wait to break. When Barbara was still a teenager, the Redfields packed up and moved to Los Angeles in search of work and a better life. For Barbara, it wasn't a relocation, it was an escape route. The moment she arrived in California, the world shifted. She saw herself not as a Minnesota girl, but as a soon-to-be movie star. And she wasn't about to wait around. Barbara's beauty didn't go unnoticed. By age 16, she was already catching eyes wherever she went, and that included William Hodge, a quiet, kind high school boy who adored her. They married in 1943 when she was barely old enough to drive. But Barbara never wanted a white picket fence. She wanted lights, cameras, and a life so big it made her small-town years disappear. Hodge offered stability, but Barbara craved chaos. She was restless, flirtatious, and never home. She began booking modeling jobs, posing for pinup photos and magazine ads that emphasized her sultry figure and bedroom stare. The marriage didn't stand a chance. Within months, Barbara filed for divorce, telling friends she loved William but couldn't live like a wife. She was already living like a starlet, long before Hollywood had written her name in lights. That early breakup was a warning shot, a sign of what was to come. Barbara didn't slow down after that first marriage, she only picked up speed. And with the spotlight getting closer, her choices were about to get wilder. Barbara then ended up in Texas when her family relocated there from Minnesota. Her father, a bakery worker, sought better employment opportunities during the wartime economic boom. It was also while she was in Texas that she met John Payton Jr., the Air Force pilot she would marry in 1945. This period in Texas served as the foundation for her eventual move to California. Encouraged by compliments and small modeling gigs, Barbara set her sights on Hollywood, leaving Texas not long after giving birth to her son in 1947 while her husband remained in the military. She began modeling, networking in Hollywood circles, and quickly started landing small roles. Barbara got her break the same way many women did back then, with studio handlers, casting couches, and a lot of champagne-soaked auditions. She was signed to a contract with Universal, who billed her as the perfect blonde. Her earliest roles were small but eye-catching. She played secretaries, seductresses, and the girl who always died just before the final act. But it didn't matter. She was being watched. In 1950, she got the role that made her a star, opposite James Cagney in Kiss Tomorrow, Goodbye. She held her own with one of the most respected actors of the time, playing a dangerous femme fatale with a sultry glare and venom in her voice. Critics praised her intensity. Cagney praised her fearlessness. Audiences couldn't look away. Barbara Payton had arrived. However, Barbara Payton didn't just arrive in Hollywood. She crash-landed like a bombshell in heels. Men adored her. Studios tolerated her. Tabloids worshipped the chaos she left in her wake. She wasn't just beautiful. She was bold, seductive, and reckless, and the town wasn't ready for what she would become. By the time she'd finished her breakthrough in Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye, Barbara had already scorched a trail of high-profile affairs and left behind a growing list of burned lovers, ruined reputations, and cocktail-fueled scandals. Her infidelity, emotional instability, scandals, and neglect of her role as a wife and mother eventually led to she and her husband divorcing. Barbara had become increasingly absorbed in Hollywood's social scene, which clashed with John's military background and expectations. She had begun drinking heavily and chasing fame, habits that only escalated in the coming years. Barbara's earliest and perhaps most telling Hollywood conquest was Howard Hughes, the reclusive, eccentric billionaire who collected women the way other men collected watches. Hughes was known for his obsession with beautiful, unpredictable women, and Barbara fit that bill perfectly. Their relationship began with flattery and gifts. Hughes sent flowers, expensive jewelry, and had his assistants offer Barbara screen tests and favors. At first, she was flattered, then bored, then dangerous. Barbara wasn't interested in being anyone's kept woman. When Hughes tried to restrict who she saw or where she went, she blew up, publicly. She once bragged to a friend that she'd told Hughes to take his diamonds and shove them. And she meant it. The affair fizzled, not because of a grand fallout, but because Barbara couldn't be controlled, and Hughes couldn't stand not being in control. She was too much fire for a man who preferred his obsessions caged. Next came Bob Hope, the clean-cut comic America loved to pretend was squeaky clean. Behind the scenes, Hope was known for indulging in secret affairs, but Barbara, she wasn't discreet. She was the tornado that blew the door off his closet. Their affair started on the set of a charity event where they were both performing. Barbara dazzled him. Hope was smitten with her sultry confidence, and for a brief time, the two were inseparable, dining at Musso Frank's, sneaking into hotel suites, and whispering through late-night calls. But Barbara, never one to play the quiet mistress, began showing up uninvited to Hope's events. Once, she cornered him at an industry party and whispered loudly, "Don't act like you don't know me in public. I've seen you naked, Bob." Bob Hope cut things off immediately after that. Barbara, for her part, laughed the whole thing off in front of reporters, tossing out one-liners like, "Hope's jokes were better than his stamina." It was classic Payton. Shameless, biting, and unconcerned with the fallout. Barbara's magnetism attracted a rotating cast of directors, producers, and fellow actors who thought they could tame her. She cycled through B-movie leads, wealthy studio execs, and even a married screenwriter or two. She was seen on Clark Gable's arm one night and wrapped around a struggling crooner the next. But the whispers about her behavior were starting to grow louder. She had a habit of drinking too much at industry mixers, sometimes downing entire bottles of champagne and chasing it with martinis before 9 p.m. Her slurred flirtations became legendary. At one infamous party hosted by Gary Cooper, Barbara reportedly arrived 3 sheets to the wind, wearing a dress 2 sizes too small and perfume strong enough to cloud a room. She propositioned nearly every man there, including Cooper's married guests, and then loudly asked one of them if he was packing like his paycheck. Cooper was furious. She was never invited back. Another night, she climbed onto a piano at a studio lounge and started singing bawdy parodies of famous show tunes, ending with a topless rendition of Some Enchanted Evening that sent execs scrambling for the exits. Barbara had become tabloid gold. Columnists like Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons couldn't get enough of her bad girl antics. She was a headline-generating machine, and for a time, that was enough to keep the roles coming. But Hollywood has never been kind to women who behave badly in public. She started getting passed over for bigger roles, whispered about in casting offices. Producers admired her looks but feared the liability. One studio head reportedly called her the most dangerous thing to ever come out of Minnesota besides snowstorms and bad luck. And then, 2 men entered her life that would change everything. One was respected, the other dangerous. Barbara would fall into a toxic triangle that turned her tabloid troubles into full-on tragedy. Great! Here's part 3 of Barbara Payton's story. The chaotic, violent, and utterly scandalous love triangle that destroyed her career and reputation, featuring Franchot Tone, Tom Neal, and a descent no publicist could spin. By 1950, Barbara Payton had climbed high, but she was teetering. Her beauty still turned heads, her name still drew headlines. But the offers were slowing and her behavior was growing wilder. Then came Francho Tone, and right behind him, Tom Neal, the man who would drag her into Hollywood infamy with fists and fury. This wasn't just a love triangle. This was a three-way collision between sex, violence, and career suicide. Francho Tone was old Hollywood royalty. A suave, refined actor with a Broadway pedigree and a name that sounded like champagne. He'd once been married to Joan Crawford, for heaven's sake. But Tone had a dark weakness. Women like Barbara Payton. They met at a party, and Barbara turned on the charm like a spotlight. Tone was 20 years older, but he was enchanted by her blonde bombshell allure. And Barbara saw an opportunity to reclaim her slipping stardom by tying herself to a respected name. He proposed just months later, dazzled and deluded, despite the very public warning signs. Friends told him to run. One even reportedly said, "You don't date Barbara, you survive her." Then 1951 came along. Enter Tom Neal, the real-life film noir thug. While Tone was polished and poised, Tom Neal was a different beast entirely. A former boxer turned actor best known for B-movie noirs, Neal had a temper like a loaded gun, and no safety switch. Barbara had been seeing both men simultaneously, a fact neither knew at first. While Tone wined and dined her in tuxedos, Neal was taking her to dive bars, trading punches with bartenders, and reportedly engaging in violent, passionate fights with Barbara that ended in broken lamps and tangled sheets. She was addicted to Neal's danger, but clung to Tone's prestige. And when both men realized they were vying for the same woman, all hell broke loose. The fight took place on September 14th, 1951, in Barbara's front yard. Tone had stopped by her place to see her, maybe even to confront her. Neal showed up moments later, enraged. What followed was so brutal it felt like something out of a pulp novel. Neal beat Francho Tone nearly to death. The actor suffered a smashed cheekbone, a broken nose, a concussion, and was left unconscious on Barbara's lawn, blood soaking the pavement. A witness said Tone's face looked like a Halloween mask that melted. Barbara, in a shocking move, chose to stay with Tom Neal, even after the police, the press, and Hollywood screamed for her to cut ties. But the story didn't end there. Tone, after weeks in the hospital and facial reconstructive surgery, took her back. Yes, he married her, despite the betrayal, the blood, the broken bones. In a shocking surprise, Barbara continued to cheat on Tone. And in an act of almost operatic chaos, Barbara left him just 53 days later, running back into Tom Neal's arms like a femme fatale in the final scene of a doomed romance. That was it. The industry, already wary of Barbara's antics, now viewed her as radioactive. Studios cut ties. Agents stopped returning calls. Her name was no longer gold. It was tabloid poison. She tried clawing back. A few cheap B-movies, some press stunts. She posed for sleazy men's magazines, trying to stay relevant. But it was over. The woman who had once starred alongside the likes of Gregory Peck and James Cagney was now famous for broken bones, police reports, and broken promises. Even Tom Neal couldn't hold on. Their relationship fizzled in a fog of violence and betrayal. Years later, Neal himself would kill his third wife in another domestic dispute and end up in prison, a fittingly grim epilogue to Barbara's darkest chapter. But for Barbara, the real descent was just beginning. The glitz was gone. The suitors had fled. But Barbara's final act was perhaps her most raw, revealing, and painful. Because it wasn't fiction. It was her life, stripped bare. Hollywood had closed its doors. The leading men had stopped calling. And Barbara Payton, once a face that graced billboards and lit up the screen beside James Cagney, was now a public cautionary tale. A punchline in cigar-chomping studio circles. A name whispered with pity in casting offices she used to breeze through. But Barbara wasn't just broke. She was broken. And the descent was brutal. As the 1950s bled into the 1960s, Barbara tried everything to scrape by. She posed for cheesecake spreads in men's magazines, took humiliating walk-on parts in low-budget films, and leaned harder and harder into alcohol and barbiturates. But the jobs dried up. The money was gone. And in time, so was her home. By 1956, a court awarded full custody of her son to her ex-husband, John Payton Jr. He alleged that Barbara was exposing their son to immoral conduct, scandal, and an unstable environment, including her associations with various men, substance abuse, and chaotic living conditions. And sadly, everything he alleged was true. Barbara became a sex worker, first discreetly, then openly. She worked the streets of Hollywood Boulevard and Sunset Strip, her once famous face now unrecognizable beneath a mess of smeared makeup and tangled hair. She was arrested multiple times for prostitution, public intoxication, and vagrancy. How did people find out? Because Barbara was too famous to disappear quietly. Every time she was arrested, the press pounced. Mugshots were printed. Headlines like "Fallen Star Sells Herself on Sunset" blared from tabloids. Her name, once paired with Cagney or Tone, was now seen next to bail amounts and court appearances. Even worse, she often showed up at the very parties she once dazzled at. Uninvited, intoxicated, begging for help or money. Her decline played out in real time, a slow-motion car crash the world couldn't stop watching. In 1963, Barbara did something shocking, even by her own standards. She wrote a book. Or rather, dictated it to ghostwriter Jerry Pam and author Leo Guild. The title? I Am Not Ashamed. It was a brutal, bloody confession. Part mea culpa, part self-sabotage, part desperate cash grab. In it, she chronicled everything. The sex, the drugs, the arrests, the blackouts, the threesomes, the beating of Francho Tone, and her nights spent sleeping with strangers for $5 just to get a bottle. She talked openly about trading sex for booze, about being used by Hollywood men, and about the sheer weight of her loneliness. There were no heroes in the story, not even Barbara. But the book didn't land the way she'd hoped. Critics panned it. Readers were too shocked to sympathize. Hollywood ignored it. The rawness was too real, too dirty, too hopeless. It wasn't a cautionary tale with a happy ending. It was a woman still bleeding from wounds she couldn't stop reopening. Barbara got a small check and another fleeting round of headlines. Then the silence returned. Barbara's last years were grim. She moved back in with her alcoholic parents in San Diego, broke, bloated, and beaten down. She'd occasionally be spotted hitchhiking along Pacific Coast Highway in heels and smeared lipstick, still hoping for a ride, a job, a miracle. She drank constantly, downing cheap whiskey and sleeping with whoever would pay for it. According to friends, her health rapidly declined. She had liver and heart problems and was almost always drunk or hungover. At just 39 years old, she looked decades older. Her final home was a cheap motel room, where she often lived with other down-and-out alcoholics and Johns who drifted in and out of her life. No lovers, no family, just a rotation of men who came for a night and left in the morning. And then, in May 1967, she collapsed. Liver and heart failure. Years of drinking, neglect, and abuse had taken their toll. Barbara Payton died at the age of 39. Once a starlet, now a forgotten corpse in a low-rent hospital bed. Only a few people attended her funeral. Barbara's story is more than a cautionary tale. It's a dissection of what Hollywood does to the broken, the beautiful, and the bold. She was chewed up and spit out, yes, but she also made choices that scorched every bridge she ever walked on. She was wild, unpredictable, and self-destructive, but she was also a woman born into chaos, groomed for objectification, and abandoned when the spotlight shifted. Her book, I Am Not Ashamed, reads today not as scandalous, but as a cry for help. A woman desperate to matter, to explain herself, to be remembered. And she is. Barbara Payton didn't just crash. She burned, exploded, and left smoldering wreckage across the Hollywood hills. She may have died forgotten by the industry, but her name still lingers, like a ghost in sequins, haunting the dreams of every woman told she's only as valuable as her youth, her beauty, or her silence.